When King Nebuchadnezzar saw Jesus. Imagine you're a king 603 years before Christ, and you saw Jesus face to face. What would you do? Many people don't even know that Jesus was in the Old Testament. This event occurs in the book of Daniel. The event of the book takes place in Babylon, a region that was ruled by Nebuchadnezzar, who was a proud and cruel tyrant who took great pleasure in torturing his victims. He ruled the ancient world as an absolute dictator. After subduing Assyria, he set his sights on Egypt, his principal adversary at the time. Because Judah was in the way, it would be necessary to get rid of it if he ever wanted to fulfill his ambition of ruling over a large empire. Nebuchadnezzar issued an order to have a number of Jewish young men trained to serve him in the capacity of men of knowledge and wisdom. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were among those who were taken captive. They were known by the names Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Chaldean. The image of God. King Nebuchadnezzar gave the order for the creation of a colossal statue made of gold. The gold statue that Nebuchadnezzar had commissioned must have been magnificent. It stood 90 feet tall. It's possible that the king planned it so that he could consolidate his power by bringing together all levels of his officials for a grand ceremony. These rulers were to attend the dedication of the statue erected by King Nebuchadnezzar and fall face down in worship of it. Everyone who disobeyed this command ran the risk of being cast into a burning furnace and being burnt to a crisp. Everyone obeyed Nebuchadnezzar's orders because he was determined to establish himself not only as the uncontested political leader of Babylon, but also as the supreme religious authority in the city, or at the very least, almost everyone. Due to the fact that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were among the officials that were present at this massive gathering, a confrontation was unavoidable. 3 of the men in the room did not bow down, even though everyone else in the room did. Many people cannot imagine that social pressure. It was not an easy fit. Like children in church looking around during prayer time to see whose eyes are open, certain Chaldeans saw the 3 Hebrew boys standing tall among all those who had prostrated themselves and ran to Nebuchadnezzar to report it. Jealousy drips from their accusations against the 3 Jews who had risen to positions of power despite their captivity. Because their faith forbade them from worshipping any god other than the true God of Israel, the petty court officials saw an opportunity to eliminate Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they did not pass up the chance to do so. When Nebuchadnezzar found out about the situation, he immediately flew into a rage. It's surprising that he gave the accused a chance to respond to the charges leveled against them. That he did may indicate his regard for them. But make no mistake, the king would accept only one response: total concession. They had 2 options: either worship the enormous gold idol or perish in fire. Despite his earlier praise for the Hebrew God, Nebuchadnezzar added, "Who is the God who can deliver you from my power?" The king's question, as before, would be answered eventually. Daniel 3:13-14. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, gave a command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up?" These valiant Jewish men defied the king's direct order and placed themselves in the hands of God. Their response is quite impressive. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to answer you on this point. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Daniel 3:16-18, Amplified Bible. In other words, they said, "We'd rather fear our God than your furnace any day. Even if he decides to let us burn, we will still serve the living God rather than your dead idol." Priceless. They preferred death to unfaithfulness to God, and had no doubt planned for the possibility of this day for a long time. Nebuchadnezzar's level of rage when his authority was defied is difficult to imagine, but apparently his face was livid. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary to match his fury. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tossed into the flames, the radiant heat was so great that the men carrying them were killed. No doubt wearing flammable clothing, the faithful Hebrews had no hope, unless hope itself intervened. Daniel 3:19-25, Amplified Bible. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and his facial expression changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then he gave a command that the furnace was to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. He commanded certain strong men in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these 3 men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their turbans, and their other clothes, and were thrown into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king looked and was astounded, and he jumped up and said to his counselors, "Did we not throw 3 men who were tied up into the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king." He answered, "Look, I see 4 men untied, walking around in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." When Nebuchadnezzar saw the men walking around in the fire, not only did he find it unbelievable that they were unharmed, but he also found it unbelievable that there were 4 of them. The 4th appeared to be a God's son, implying that he was the pre-incarnate Christ. Nebuchadnezzar tells us the 4th person was the Son of God. During the most difficult part of their ordeal, Jesus was there with them physically. In the midst of their ordeal in the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego may or may not have been aware that the Son of God was with them. Although there are times when we are conscious of Jesus' presence in our afflictions and other times when we are not, we should never doubt that he is present. We read, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire." Nebuchadnezzar also noticed that the 4 men were free while they were in the fire. Only the ropes that were holding them together were burnt by the fire. God is able to strike with astonishment those individuals whose hearts are most hardened, not only against him, but also against his people. He that made the soul can make his sword to approach to it, even to that of the greatest tyrant. The furnace was large, so that they had room to walk. They were unhurt, so that they were able to walk. Their minds were easy, so that they were disposed to walk, as in a paradise or garden of pleasure. Proverbs 6:29, Amplified Bible. Or can a man walk on hot coals, and his feet not be scorched? The answer to this is yes. They were not striving to get out, finding themselves unhurt. Instead, they walked around carefree in the middle of the flames, believing that the same God who protected them in the fire would also deliver them from it. Nebuchadnezzar had the mistaken impression that he was the most powerful person in the world. But here he met the person who was far more powerful than he was. What effect would that have on him? Will he still have the self-assurance to demand that others worship him as if he were a god? Daniel 3, 26-27, Amplified Bible. Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the blazing furnace and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out of there. Come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the mist of fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered around them and saw that in regards to these men the fire had no effect on their bodies. Their hair was not singed, their clothes were not scorched or damaged, even the smell of smoke was not on them. When the king realized that the men he had sentenced had been divinely rescued, he summoned them, and not a single hair on their heads had been scorched in the process. Being thrown into Nebuchadnezzar's deadly fire had proven to be a piece of cake. It's incredible that anyone survived even for a second inside the furnace when so many others perished right outside the entrance. God can deliver us from a trial, or he can miraculously sustain and strengthen us in a trial. We are astounded by the faith in the one true God.